Apple says the iPhone 14 Plus has the
best battery life ever in an iPhone.
But is that true? Here we have all the new iPhone 14s, the iPhone 14 Pro Max, the iPhone 14 Plus, the iPhone 14 Pro, and of course the regular iPhone 14. So let's jump right in with some YouTube. As always, I've made sure to match the settings on all of them with Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and location enabled. There's no SIM card on either of them, but I did match the brightness to the exact same level. I'm very excited for this battery test. I want to see how much better the battery life of the 14 Plus is compared to its smaller siblings, the 14 Pro and the regular 14. But I'm also curious to see if it can dethrone the current battery champ, the 14 Pro Max. Now, spoiler alert, the 14 Pro Max beat the 13 Pro Max, the previous battery champion, in my previous battery test, which I did not expect. It has a slightly smaller battery, and the battery life was already so incredibly good on the 13 Pro Max. I'm very curious to see if the 14 Plus will be able to beat the 14 Pro Max. They're both the exact same size, same display size, and the exact same battery capacity. In theory, the 14 Pro Max should have better battery life, as it's the best Apple has to offer. It should also have the best battery life, but Apple did claim that the 14 Plus has the best battery life ever on an iPhone. But if you do look closely on Apple's website and actually compare the two, the only spec in which the 14 Plus has better battery life is in audio playback, and in video playback and video streaming, the 14 Pro Max is rated to last longer. And after an hour of watching YouTube, this seems to be true. The 14 Pro Max has a big lead over the others, and after another hour of Netflix, this is still true, with the 14 Pro Max having a 5% gap over the 14 Plus. But this is far from over. From my past experience, the non-Pro models have often had better battery life than the Pro models. They are pretty similar, and the two deciding factors which will determine which has better battery life is the display and the chipset. Now, all of them have an incredible Super Retina XDR OLED panel, 6.1 inches on the smaller ones, and 6.7 inches on the big boys. In terms of resolution, they don't differ much. The Pros do get slightly brighter, but for this test, I've matched them all, so that shouldn't be a factor here. Now here you can also nicely see a difference between the notches, which is now a dynamic island, is what Apple calls it on the new Pro models. Now, I don't know if it does anything in terms of battery life, but I think it looks great, and it's an amazing solution that Apple found. And it also makes the others look a lot older than they actually are with that pretty big notch. Now, the biggest difference in terms of the display, and which will have the biggest impact on the battery life, is the refresh rate. The Pros have an LTPO panel, which allows them to variably adjust the refresh rate all the way down to 1 Hz and all the way up to 120 Hz. So if you're scrolling or playing a game, it will go up to 120 Hz and it will all be really smooth. But if you're just watching a YouTube video or you're just on a static web page, you don't need that high refresh rate. It will automatically go down to, let's say, 30 Hz. The 14 and the 14 Plus don't have this tech, so they're fixed at 60 Hz. Now the question is that dynamic switching going below 60 Hz enough to compensate for the added battery drain when going above 60 Hz? After an hour of Instagram, we've reached the 4-hour mark. The 14 Plus has pretty much caught up to the Pro Max. There's just a 2% gap now, and it has set itself apart from the 14 and the 14 Pro, with now a 5% gap. Now, another difference in terms of the displays is the always on display, which is only available on the Pro models. And it's enabled by, once again, that LTPO tech, which allows the displays to go down to just 1 Hz. That in theory shouldn't drain the battery that much, but we're gonna test that now. We're gonna do a standby test, as we don't use our phones constantly non-stop throughout the day. And the results were very interesting. I did not expect this. They were in standby for 9 hours roughly. The 14 lost 3%, 4% lost on the 14 Plus. Both reasonable results, nothing incredible, but not too bad either. But the Pros lost 10 and 11% respectively, which is just insane. So if you really care about your battery life and want to maximize it, definitely make sure to turn off the always on display because it drains the battery a ton. Maybe Apple can fix this in the future, but until then, I would turn it off if you don't really need it. If you're enjoying this video so far, make sure to smash the like button and subscribe down below. The 14 Plus now has a 5% lead over the 14 Pro Max, and the 14 now has an even bigger lead over the 14 Pro. Now, using the cameras is always very demanding on the battery. They do have different cameras, but in terms of battery drain, it was the same. There's no difference between the non-Pro and the Pro models. 9% lost on the Pro Max and the Plus, and 12% lost on the 14 and 14 Pro, which is a lot in just half an hour of using the camera. Now 6 hours in, the 14 and 14 Plus have a 5% lead over their Pro counterparts, and the 14 Plus is just increasing its lead. At 7 hours, it has a 7% lead over the Pro Max. Now the other main difference between the Pro models and the non-Pro models is the chipset. Both the 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max have the new A16 Bionic chip, while the 14 and 14 Plus unfortunately only get last generation's chip, the A15 Bionic. Benchmarks show that the A16 Bionic is a bigger step up than I thought it would be, but it's not a big deal, and the A15 Bionic is already so good that I wouldn't really pick one over the other just based on the chipset. They now also all come with 6 gigs of RAM, so there's no difference there either. Both these smaller devices have gotten a low battery warning by now. We're now going to hop into a Zoom call, which is always very intense on the battery life. At 8 hours, the 14 Plus is the only one which hasn't gotten a low battery warning, while the 14 and 14 Pro are on single digits only. They didn't make it to the 9-hour mark, while the bigger siblings still have some juice left, so let's fast forward this and finally get to the results. In last place is the iPhone 14 Pro. At 8 hours and 33 minutes, it is a very good result, and don't worry, all of them have very good battery life. But it is unfortunate that the second most expensive device out of them has the worst battery life. The 14 Pro once again has worse battery life than the regular 14, which lasted just a couple minutes longer at 8 hours and 53 minutes, which is also great battery life, but I probably wouldn't recommend this phone. Probably go for the iPhone 13, which is basically the same phone and also has pretty much the same battery life. Now you might say that it was a little unfair because the 14 Pro had the always on display enabled and the 14 doesn't have it, and you're right, if you would turn off the always on display, the 14 Pro probably would have beat the 14, but I just say they're pretty much equal. And in terms of battery life, don't buy one over the other. Now, if you've seen my previous battery test and you're wondering why the results are now different than in the previous one, that's down to 2 reasons. First of all, battery tests are always different. Not all settings are the same, not all apps are the same, and it's really hard to replicate a battery test one-to-one, and everybody's usage is different anyway. And the other reason is that this test was done on a newer version of iOS 16. The previous iOS 16 version did drain the battery quite a bit, so it could be that the battery life was improved with the newer software. Coming in second place is the iPhone 14 Pro Max. It lasted nearly an hour longer than the 14 at 9 hours and 51 minutes. An amazing result, and it will definitely have all-day battery. I've personally been using it as my main phone and I don't have any issues with it at all, but it really surprised me that the 14 Plus was able to beat it. It nearly lasted another hour longer than the 14 Pro Max at 10 hours and 50 minutes. I could not believe it, and Apple's claim that it has the best battery life ever on an iPhone seems to be true. Now, once again, if you would disable the always on display on the Pro Max, the gap wouldn't be as wide, but the 14 Plus would have still won. Definitely did not expect this. What do you guys think of these results? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I'm very curious to see if an Android competitor can dethrone the 14 Plus as the best battery life. Make sure to watch this video next to see how the whole current iPhone lineup compares in terms of battery life, and I'll see you guys in the next one.